From the dark depths of the Underdark to the Viking sagas inspired by Iceland, come explore the craft of game design and creating worlds with Brent Knowles. Welcome to Tales Under the Cat Tree. I'm your host, Dupes, and these are tales by humans for humans. After all, words and stories are what give meaning to the worlds we live in. This is the third episode in my current series on creating worlds. If you haven't had the chance, do take a listen to episode 54, where I introduced the idea of building worlds along with the dungeon masters of my Dungeons & Dragons campaigns here in Helsinki. In episode 55, Dr. Irvin Wakentien and I discuss the idea of fantasy worlds with real life, talking about propaganda from Albania to Brexit. Today, though, I'm happy to have game designer Brent Knowles on the show. Brent and I worked together at Bioware in the years of Neverwinter Nights and Dragon Age. But Brent is much more than a video game designer. He's been fascinated by tabletop role-playing and the worlds of the mind since he was very small. Since Bioware, he has also published his own set of campaigns for Dungeons & Dragons called The Raiders of the Serpent Sea. These days, he's working on an unannounced story-based role-playing game at Thought Pennies. Let's go explore the art of game design and worlds with Brent Knowles.
Hi, I'm Brent Knowles. I'm a game designer. I've been doing the game design thing for, several decades. And I've also been a writer since well before I ever entered the game industry.
You and I met at Bioware. What games did you actually work on?
I worked on Baldur's Gate 2. That was my first game in the video game industry. So I came onto that about halfway through and did a variety of tasks, mostly technical design, though I did a bit of writing. Then I moved on to Neverwinter Nights. And that was my primary series of projects I worked on, the expansion packs as well, Shadows of Undentide and Hordes of the Underdark. So that was like a period of a few years where I was just fully immersed in the Neverwinter experience. Then Dragon Age, then on to Jade Empire, then back to Dragon Age. A few years ago, I ran a Kickstarter for Raiders of the Serpent Sea, which is a Norse mythology-inspired Dungeons & Dragons campaign. So full world, full campaign, all the way to level 20, a lot of work. And lots of player options and all that fun stuff too. And that was really inspired by a trip to Iceland that really kind of honed the world I wanted to make.
And you're still working in the games industry. These days you are working for
a company called Thought Pennies, where I'm the design director working on a really cool and fun and unannounced role-playing game.
So how do you think about creating worlds?
Like when I say I'm not a visual person, if somebody used to write a sentence out to me, I don't necessarily see that fully in my mind's eye. I see a little bit. Likewise, when I'm writing, I'm really bad at this. I'm focused on the emotions and on the dialogue and on what's happening. But my editing passes, I usually have to add. I have to be like, oh, I haven't even described the room people are standing in. My initial approaches, I think I'd be really concrete on what I was building. So I would draw maps out because I think I needed to get it on paper because I couldn't hold it in my head. And a lot of my early experiences as, quite a young person would be drawing just maps and coming up with weird names for things. And that stemmed from, I spent a lot of time with my grandfather out in the woods. So he would watch logging camps when they were off season. And so we'd have all these trailers and everything in the middle of the woods. We would just make sure nothing bad happened to them. So I would often have like a 40 or 60 unit series of trailers to myself with my grandfather. And he read a lot and I would read a lot, but I'd also explore the woods. There were like packs of wolves and other things in the vicinity. And I would see like a weird creek or whatever, and I'd draw maps. And I would just be like, this is the Witch's Creek. And I would draw them on paper bags from grocery stores. Like I'd cut them and draw maps out. And I was a kid, so I wasn't doing this as an adult. But I was a kid, and like people who were hunters or whatever would drive through and they would buy the maps from me sometimes. Being nice to a kid, right? Like, here's like $1 for this silly fantasy map you drew. So I'd imagine all these fantasy creatures that could be living in the woods that were bordering these logging camps. And then just later on, I discovered Dungeons and Dragons and didn't know what it meant. I just saw kids playing over a map in a table. And I'd be like, oh, that's neat. Initial world building was just building all these maps and then rule systems. I just kind of I started being a dungeon master. And then that friend group from elementary school, this friend group, we were all creative and we made a comic book. That was my first world building. The character was called Sir Scarface and he's in this weird fantasy world. But that got put in the library in our elementary school. People could sign it out. I read like the Shannara series and like the Bulgariad and Tolkien. I came into late. Mostly I was building my own things. I'd read something, it'd spur some ideas, and I'd create 2 or 3 worlds of my own. And so I started sending stories out when I was in my early teens to magazines, trying to sell fantasy stories to the various magazines.
The days when fantasy magazines actually were being read and or being published.
Yeah, and I learned the postal system as a kid for that whole reason, right? I learned like how you made a self-addressed stamped envelope so they could send a reply back to you.
What's your favorite world that you've built? Your personal favorite of all the worlds that you've put together?
Nostalgia-wise is a fantasy world I made for Dungeons & Dragons. So after playing some of the pre-published material, my friends and I gradually just kind of co-developed our own world. Could I tell you much about that world? Not a ton, other than that my friends' names are all part of the countries. And because we adventured in it, the kingdoms got named after our characters. And then I evolved that over time and I wrote a fantasy novel in that world. As part of that world building, I developed like a language, alphabet, and a religion, which helped me in Philosophy 101 in university because we were tasked with designing a religion. It was just a neat world more because it was probably neat to us, right? The people in my group. Like if I explained all the details, you'd be like, you guys are kind of dorky kids. And a lot of fantasy stories I'd write later that didn't have to be in a specific, like if I didn't make a world for that story, they got set in this world. And I don't even have to spell it all out to the reader, right? I just give enough for the reader to kind of get through the story. They don't need to know the whole world. But in my mind, that's over in that continent. So a lot of my stories are set in this fantasy world, which I then destroy in Raiders of the Serpent Sea. So in Raiders of the Serpent Sea, the world I designed is kind of a Viking-esque world that's populated by people who come from a world that was destroyed in a Ragnarok. And that world, in my view, was my old campaign world.
I hate to say this. You are truly a dork and a nerd, and welcome to the club. That's fantastic. I love it. I absolutely love it. So you said that Iceland inspired the Raiders world.
Yeah, and the trip originated from, and I'm probably going to get things really wrong because it's been such a long time, is I had just read some of the sagas. So Iceland had always had like a mythological thing for me. In 2016, I think, I was finally able to take my kids there, and the culture's cool. The history tradition there is so deep. The families that have lived there for generations and everything like that, and then just the terrain just feels very connected to history, but without like not architecture and stuff, but with like people have lived in these lands, but there's not like a ton of stuff there even now. Like you could look almost in a direction and go like a Viking could have looked in this direction and seen, this coastline and this beach and these craggy rocks that look like trolls. So yeah, just kind of fueled imagination. So that a few years later, when I started building this campaign for Dungeons & Dragons, I was going to use my homebrew campaign world initially, but something Viking themed seemed more appropriate. Plus, I can destroy my campaign world and also use that to feed into this world. It was a fun world to design because I got to kind of really think about how sailing would work in all the different ports that you'd want to connect to as I started building out the world, which was done very dorkily. In my living room, I had a hex map and I just started shading in with pencil crayon, brown for land, blue for water, and just started, and then it would erase things if I needed to. And I I had a whole paper grid or a hex map of my world.
When you're actually building out the world, beyond just getting the map together and the places together, what makes a world come alive for you?
I think it's characters, which is sometimes hard in world building, thinking about the characters from the past and then the characters that are going to be played by the players in the present. Again, using Norse mythology as kind of a cheating starting point helped, because I started to imagine what my version of Thor would be in the past and my version of Odin. So I started with that cast of characters because they went on to define the clans that existed in the present day. And then those clans are what the players picked from when they started their player journey. Once there's people, even in the past, the world's history starts coming alive for me. And that initial cast of characters actually were all adventurers. So my version of the North Pantheon were actually adventurers in my old world who died, or would have died, but they fled. Through shenanigans, they become divine in this new world. And so they become kind of the gods of the new place. But they were just the party of high-level adventurers in the old world who failed to save the old world. So yeah, they influenced the character of the places I drew on the map, right? So for raiders, it is really the clans are probably end up being the heart of how all the storytelling works. Like, this clan hates this clan. These clans are kind of allies. This clan gets wiped out at the beginning of the campaign entirely, right? And then what effects all those have on it. And some of it's some collaboration. Even though I was a team of one, I hired artists to create monsters and maps and everything. So that's a bit of like the BioWare stuff, right? Once you start having a team and you can collaborate, it's nice. But with the map work, when I handed the map off to John Stevenson, who's a really accomplished Mapmaker, does lots of tabletop map stuff, he just had lots of kind of feedback. I wanted to do some stuff that he said was really dumb and would confuse people. And I was like, fine, water won't run up mountains if you don't think anybody's going to understand that, John. Fine. Artists even will make a mistake, ask for a piece of art, they give it back differently. I'm like, well, I'm not going to make them redo it. I'm going to change the world. Those mistakes help a lot because it starts making things more organic. But that happened time and time again, just like, a continent got redrawn slightly, and that meant I had to change all the village placement. And then I started thinking about things quite differently. Or the creature artist gave me a very different creature. I don't know how you got all the words completely wrong to make the creature look like that, but yours is way cooler than my idea was. And now I'm going to roll with it. And this creature is like the child of witches and giants. It's just really fun. I mean, I wish everybody could just kind of live in that creative zone all the time.
Listening to it reminds me of how much the creative process is such a synthesis of stuff you've experienced, things you've seen, accidents that happen, and somehow something fires in your brain and go, whoa, I connect the dots between this, and this, and suddenly, yeah, you've got a monster that's the child of witches and demons or whatever. Creating a world that is your own is one thing, but having to design in a world that someone else has built. So, for example, Hordes of the Underdark. You're not going to be able to go change Forgotten Realms in the Underdark because there are certain rules and they're already built. How does that work as a game designer?
With a pre-made world that other people love, that millions of people love, is then more about figuring out what the kind of the fan wish fulfillment part of that is. If you're going to the Underdark, who and what are you going to expect to see? I list my things, and say James Olin would list his things, and other people, the writers would list their things. And there'd be a lot of overlap. And I think that's really how a lot of the initial BioWare games were designed. Yeah, in Hordes of the Underdark, we did several plans. My memory is certainly hazy because getting old. What shift isn't what I wrote for an initial plan, because I had listed a lot of the fan fulfillment stuff, like Dritz should have been part of Hordes of the Underdark. Loth should have been part of Hordes of the Underdark. Our IP partner didn't want any of them used. So then it was a matter of like, can't use these characters. Okay, well, what are the next coolest characters people are going to expect to see, right? And we set up the dungeon, I guess, beneath Waterdeep, right? That's kind of an iconic dungeon to kind of match what we thought player expectations would be, because we're making this world for them. So that becomes a little bit different, right? You're trying to tease out what is the cool part. I think you had mentioned on one of the other things I'd listened to about, paying attention to the forums to find out if they're going to do Fireball correctly.
Yes, I remember that.
Right, and that's very common, and that's how I was on Baldur's Gate 2 for sure. I came in as a super D&D person. Baldur's Gate 1 was okay, was kind of my feedback. I don't think I said it that way because I was so excited to have a job. But you did a lot of things wrong about Dungeons & Dragons, and I'm going to fix them all. And that isn't necessarily the right approach either, right? Because you do things differently for a game. But yeah, in terms of the world building part of it, players are going to want to go into the world, and this is the tough part. It's going to have to feel like how they imagine the world. But they might imagine that world a bit differently than I do. It's about what parts of that world are you going to want to explore, constrained by technology. What does our technology platform allow us to do? And it's always a compromise and solutions. And I think we got it pretty good on Hordes. Hordes is one of the things I'm probably most proud of. Yeah, I think that was like sweet spot for me at BioWare. Just the culture was still perfectly there, and everybody, we were very aligned.
This does bring into mind something else. You said, you have to suddenly think about what a player might imagine the world to be. So they start owning the world, whatever it is, whether it's Hordes of the Underdark, Shadows of Undertide, Baldur's Gate 2, or Raiders. They start feeling that this is their own thing. What does that feel like to you as the creator of the world?
Honestly, 95% of the time is really cool. I occasionally would get emails going like, hey, I'm running your campaign and I want to do this differently. Can I? And I'm like, yeah, it's your campaign now. There's like a Discord for this. And I read it sometimes. I'm like, wow, they're very smart. They've like made connections in my world that I didn't make, but that I laid the groundwork for. And I'm not necessarily the one who'd ever make the connection between like this character and that character, but they do. And it actually makes a lot of sense. Like, you're all geniuses. Yeah, it's really neat. It's like they're finishing the design. I find it very amusing to read and to see how they explore my world differently than I would. And then certain things stay the same. Like a lot of campaigns have kind of similar experiences, which teaches me a bit about writing, right? I have a scenario early on where you're supposed to pick one of three Ranger captains to steal a ship from. And in my personal test campaign, a particular character, I think my group hated him. And almost every single group hates him as well. And they almost always take that ship. Because the way I wrote him, he's just a little snotty and arrogant. Every DM runs that character similarly, and every group hates that character more than other characters because I was just too many negative tags on him that he comes across as a horrible person. And it's really cool. Like, people have finished this campaign, and it's a long campaign. Like, it's a too long campaign. And some of them will email me for their final session. We've made it to the end, and we're about to, pit off against the big bad, and, wish us luck. And that's kind of cool.
That is very, very, very cool. I play D&D with my D&D group, and we, of course, have our worlds, as I've talked about. And I consider ourselves to be amateurs. You're a little bit more professional. Someone's actually paid you to do some of this stuff. So that's actually pretty cool. Some people are talking about your stuff on a Discord channel, and some you can watch it on YouTube. So that's cool. So I'm going to ask kind of a different question from you. What takes you out of a game world?
Like in a video game, and I've made video games that break this rule, it's really disconcerting to build up all this cool world and characters, and then like to open a chest and find like the +1 warhammer right beside the characters who are telling you how poor they are. When world and gameplay don't align, or story and gameplay don't align, like that's a definite take me out. Other than that, I'm a fairly forgiving person from straight storytelling point of view. And again, I do it myself because it's really hard to be your own editor. Is characters who are just creating drama to further the drama will make me feel like the entire world and situation isn't believable. Most blockbuster movies fall into this. Like, if they just stayed home and did nothing, everything would have been fine. But because they overreacted to a situation or did something out of character, things out of character, it just breaks the story, and then that breaks the world. I see them as maybe different engines. There's a story engine, a game engine, and maybe even a world engine, though I find like the world and story can be really tied together. And if it feels like those are built by separate teams, then it gets really weird and disconnected, and you start poking holes at things, right? And so as a game designer for video games specifically, it's lovely when you have fewer of those holes for people to poke at, right? Because you'd like them to consider the experience to be a connected experience, and something I'm trying to do better in the future. All mediums can fail at this. Television can fail at this. Movies can fail at this. But I don't understand why it keeps happening. I'm not going to say the movie, but I just watched the movie the weekend that we stopped halfway through because it was like, this is all just exposition. Somebody's like rolling a dice to say, this dramatic thing happens now, and now this dramatic thing happens now. And what is the stupidest decision this character can make in this scenario? That's the decision they're going to do.
What gets people into a game or a world? What are the kind of things that you think about? Let's say a tabletop role-playing group is just about to start a session in a new world, and the DM has it all prepared and stuff like that. What kind of advice would you give them to get that world set up ready for the characters and the players to feel, yeah, they're going to go straight in?
I would definitely encourage the game master to not run ahead and plan everything without talking to the players and understanding both like the players' personalities and the things they're bringing into the campaign, but also what they want their characters to do. That's a thing I don't think I really understood when I was a teenager. It can't be my campaign I'm running for you. It has to be our campaign. So the things that the players are telling me, even outside of the campaign, I have to think about, the experiences that they're going through in their life, and then what fantasy fulfillment they want fulfilled. And it's my job as the game master to not tell my story, but to adjust my story to accommodate those things that they're expecting. So this is where actually pre-made campaigns like Raiders can be hard, because that is literally Brent's story that the DM's trying to run. And so the hook on Raiders that I stole from James Olin that he used on his campaign, Odyssey of the Dragonlords, is there are things called epic backgrounds, which are thematic things for a player to pick. Like, I want to be the Bondit. And that means there's another player in the campaign who's also Bondit, and we're like brother and sister or something like that, right? And we're going to get some rules mechanic benefits for running this background, but we're also going to get the story is going to connect back to us in a whole bunch of places. Many times, our personal backstory is going to come up again and again and again. So I have several backgrounds like that weave into the main plot, and that's how me as a writer of a pre-made campaign can do it to some level to encourage the DM to customize that for their own players.
Let's take a step towards the video game side. How do you as a game designer think about the player playing a video game and getting immersed in the world? What are the things that you do as a designer to make that happen?
Depends on the scope of the game. Like, if it's a writing heavy game, right, there's several people who are going to have to coordinate on this. For a BioWare style game, it is always like the companions to immediately get likable or dislikable, but entertaining people who are going to be traveling with you and bantering with you. That's for me always been the big BioWare hook. I would even think about the world from that point of view of the people you're going on the adventure with is super important. And because I tend to work on similar types of video games, that's always what I look at first. But a video game's harder, right? Because a video game, I'm creating a package for you. Your thing might not be in that package at all because I don't have enough shared experience with you or an unlimited budget to cater to kind of everybody's player fantasy expectations. The best thing is a well-run D&D campaign, to be honest. That's where it can be really magical because everybody knows each other, and a really good DM can be tailoring stuff. I'll be honest, as a DM, like, occasionally my players have said stuff like, "Oh, I bet you the big twist is blah, 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 blah." I'm like, totally isn't, but can I play with that now? And then I'll revise the next session. And it's really hard to do in a video game. I think there are some very talented narrative writers who've kind of emerged from the BioWare training pool, like either worked at BioWare or been taught by somebody who worked at BioWare, which is a weird thing I've been bumping into now, right? Or like, I don't know what we'd call them, second generation BioWareans or third generation BioWareans who never actually worked at BioWare, but who have been influenced by folks from BioWare. Some of them are really good at creating those connections quickly, but it does require synergy across a larger team of, the gameplay has to support that. And so it becomes harder. There's a lot more people being dungeon masters nowadays and talking about the craft of dungeon mastering. So even some of what I pick up now isn't something I learned. It's something I learned from playing. I learned from watching other people, because this is also a weird space. So that Dungeons and Dragons, it's popular.
Yes.
And it's so weird to me to be talking with a friend I used to play in D&D with in a bar about Dungeons and Dragons and having people come up and joining the conversation, whether it's like the waitress or somebody else going like, "I play D&D too." I'm like, what? So yeah, it's neat. And there's a lot of people who are thinking about storytelling now through that medium. And so there's a lot of conversations happening, folks can listen in on or participate in and become better dungeon masters. So I've been trying to continue getting better as well.
That's very cool. I would like to say thank you so much for coming and talking about the craft of, game design. And it is a craft. It's very difficult to tell stories. And you've told some amazing stories over the years that many people who have listened or will listen to this podcast will have played. And will continue to play for some time to come. So A, thank you from me as well. And B, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, I really appreciate the invitation, and I always enjoy talking to you. And it's been a really long time since we've last chatted. It's been far too long, and
it was fun. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thanks again to Brent for spending some of his busy time with me on air. If you have questions you want me to ask Brent, send them in so I can ask him in a future episode. If you want to explore Raiders of the Serpent Sea yourself, I've linked to the campaigns on my show notes, which you can find at tales.dupes.ca. That's tales.dups.ca. What did you think about our discussion? I would love to hear from you. Please get in touch with me at contact@dups.ca. Listen to the archives wherever you get your podcast or at tales.dupes.ca. This podcast is about the worlds we create, the realities we conjure, and the wonders of the human imagination. This podcast, including its intro music, is produced, edited, and created by me, Dileepa Wijewardena. If you are lucky enough to have a pet, give them some treats and a cuddle until we meet again for some tales under the cat tree.